Hello and welcome to RuggaMatrix International, episode 222, and I'm your host, Juro Sen, and this is Ben Kimber as usual. G'day, Ben.
G'day, Juro. How are you, mate?
Good. I know you're under the weather. You okay?
I'm okay.
All right, ready to talk rugby. Two rugby championship games of the weekend. South Africa and the All Blacks victorious. I guess we don't have to say that. It goes without saying with the All Blacks. But Ben, busy on the comment sections, on the threads through Facebook and YouTube. Let's not mess around. Let's go straight to the strike issue of the week.
Strike issue of the week, of course, our great sponsor, Strike.
Who are phone cradles, by the way, for cars, if you didn't know.
Right. The issue of the week, and it actually will tie into the comment of the week, which I'll bring up later, but the issue of the week for me is the Wallabies pack and the Wallabies attitude. I'm a little concerned at what I heard after the game, and I'm very concerned about what I saw in the game.
All right, so they did talk themselves up a bit about their sort of midfield attack and the ability to create things, but they can't finish. But in the end, they didn't win the test match. So what's your big concern there?
My big concern, mate, was it was a very pedestrian Springboks outfit. It was a very pedestrian game, and coming out of that game, I looked at the Wallabies pack performance in particular, and I saw some comments from other commentators who I respect, such as Paul Cully, who I think I've said before is one of the guys I think reads the game very well. The Wallabies pack did not engage in that game the way you need to in any way, shape or form if you're going to compete consistently at international rugby level. The pack, to me, the way that they approached the breakdown a lot was they looked that they were submitting into the tackle. And that's an interesting word because I was thinking that word and it'll come in our viewer comments later.
Right, yeah.
But it looked like the way they were hitting the line and the way they were hitting it up, they were all so ready to hit the ground and set for quick ball, which just meant they didn't engage in the ruck. And I think the other thing that was interesting about that, particularly in terms of some of the comments that we get from our users a lot, is there's a lot of complaints around the Australian commentators being very biased. For this game in South Africa, they actually had Timmy Horn and Stephen Hoyles over there, who I think are two of the guys who are more fair, if you will.
Yep.
And both of them made very pointed comments in the middle of the game around the performance of the pack, and particularly their support of each other and the sets of three they were using to approach the breakdowns, and how it just wasn't working. Yeah,
I think they tried to play an upskilled forwards game, and we know that they're trying really hard, but they certainly haven't got the skills of the Australian backs, as we all know, who are very talented. But I don't know if Australia's playing a game up front that they're sort of overreaching themselves. But the fact that they created a few opportunities, and I think Michael Hooper said, yeah, they got there, but probably rushed it a bit. I mean, it should be over that stage now. They should be ready to balance themselves, settle down, and realise, okay, we're in this position. So, they're playing a South African team who I still believe will be a good side. Early days yet, because they're going through a generational change, but they needed Morné Snane there to settle everything down with his boot. Just unstoppable at Loftus. But Australia rushing to get the job done, and if you rush and panic and don't use that old head, then you're not going to succeed against a side like the Springboks.
Yeah, and particularly I think we spoke a couple of weeks ago and said that we thought that the way forward for South Africa was most likely to go back to more of the kicking game, the structured forward play, and they did do that. Their attack didn't go a lot of places, but Morné Snane at 10, you're not going to see the most inventive attack. I thought they might put Pat Lambie there. He came in at fullback.
Yep.
Snane, a couple of nice chick kicks, etc., but really not a lot of action on the ball that was going to trouble the Wallabies' defence too much. Now, that said, I don't want to just hammer the Wallabies because they did it again. They started really well. We saw some things we haven't seen for a while. We saw Scott Sio carrying the ball. Scott Sio scoring a try off a Kepu pass. A bit like the All Blacks, a bit of forward movement of the ball, and we had the man go over. We saw some reasonable play. Michael Hooper played his heart out again.
Yeah.
And Sean McMahon. Now, we talked about Sean McMahon last week. He came in at number 8. He had an excellent 40 minutes, probably 35 minutes or right before he did his ankle, and he was really, really missed in that second half.
So injury forcing a change there, and Leroy Houston coming into the squad. We know him well from his club days at Eastwood at the Waratahs. He had an issue where we actually went missing for a while. One of our matches in Queensland when we were going on tour, I was media manager at the time, but he's been plying his trade overseas and now coming back to Queensland again. Todd Kefu had some interesting comments to make about the Australian number 8 situation.
He did, and I was with you on that tour when the Leroy Houston went missing, and it was the first use, I believe, of the Houston We Have a Problem headline.
Yes,
which I think everyone's wheeling out. Probably they'll do it again as soon as he's back in there. It was a really interesting time for him. Nice to see him back in there, but Kefu, God bless him, we talked about his honesty last week. He had a real chat about it this week. He talked about Lepeti Tamani's got to be the number 8 for the Wallabies in McMahon's absence. He actually talked about Higginbotham as a guy that he think was a missed opportunity for Australia to develop.
You know what? I agree with him.
Yeah,
I agree with him.
One of our commentators actually brought that up with me too and asked where he was. But he gave McCalman a bit of a serve too. He said, if not Tamani, without a Higginbotham, you got McCalman, who's the best of a bad bunch.
I think he's right.
Yeah, I think he is right.
I think he's right, mate.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And I think if you go back, we talk about our coaching systems. What are they adding? And coaching in Australia tends to be check in, check out sort of thing. You by the numbers, whatever else. Whereas you look at places like New Zealand, it's a real holistic sort of approach. They care for the player at all times. But with the coaching of Australian players, and I've seen David Lyons doing some stuff for the media, one of the greatest, most gifted natural players of all time, but no one could teach him to pass the ball. If he could offload, David Lyons was a totally different player, but never really had that in his game. So, and I seriously question the coaches that he played under, why they weren't able to do that. Now, same with Higginbotham. Amazing natural talent. He's a guy who out-sprinted, if you remember in Brisbane a few years back, the fastest backs in the world from South Africa. And he could still play at the back of the scrum. He also put on weight at university by drinking beer. So he's a legend of the game in that regard. But he's that rough edges, he's an abrasive style. And I know all our Kiwi listeners and viewers hate some of our abrasive players, but it's a love-hate relationship. They actually love to see them play, and he's one of those.
Yeah.
So I think Toto Kefu is bang on again, and his honesty is so refreshing, and it's good to see.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about that back row, and particularly McMahon, because it brought to mind a story from a couple of weeks back. Now, when McMahon went out there, and I said before, he's one of those guys who's a bit of a crazy guy because we love him, right?
Yes.
But the effort is unchallengeable, right? The effort is fantastic. He gets absolutely stuck in, plays above his weight, and goes hard all day. And it made me think of a story that Peter Fitzsimons, a former colleague of mine at the Herald and a former Wallaby, he wrote a few weeks back where Eddie Jones was in town. We talk a lot about Eddie, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Eddie Jones was in town, and Fitzy recounted going to see a Western Force lunch 10 years ago in Perth, where a coach stood up, and he didn't name the super coach, but we could probably have a crack at who it might have been, who talked about the amount of the way that stats now influence a game. He said, if we keep Richie McCaw to a certain number of possessions a game or below a certain number, we'll win. If he gets above it, we'll lose. And threw out all these numbers, and he said he was just totally confused. And then he went to a lunch when Eddie Jones was in town. I think it was at Hunters Hill Rugby Club. And Eddie Jones came out and said, there's two stats that we care about. I'm not a stats coach. There's two stats I care about. How fast a player gets up off the ground and gets back in defence, and how fast a player gets up off the ground and gets back in attack. And if you want to see that, check out McMahon in about the 9th minute of the Wallabies game, who just shut down a Springbok attack all by himself. Or check out the game of Patrick Tuipulotu for the All Blacks, particularly that tackle on Sanchez, which was a bit unlucky, the way that he got pulled for a dangerous tackle for that. But a couple of guys there that we're seeing a lot of that in the All Blacks pack, and we're not seeing a lot of it in the Wallaby pack. And I think McMahon really embodied that for me.
It's the repeat performance, Ben, and it's the time period between that. One of the funniest things I've ever seen, and Coach Bob Dwyer, it was hilarious, when Rocky Elson was starting out with the Waratahs, he had no way of managing his performance on the field. And I don't mean skill-wise, this is energy-wise. He would play at 2,000% straight away, and he'd collapse on the field like he was dead. And then miraculously, after a couple of minutes rest, he'd get back up and do it again. But he had no way of managing the way he played the game because he just played 1,000 miles an hour. There was a bit of rugby league in him about that, getting up and getting in the line again, that sort of stuff. So being able to do that, like Sean McMahon, is absolutely valuable for Australia, and you can't afford to have any bludgers there. And because in this game, because the way that Australia has to compete against other forward packs is a little bit different, and they need to be very mobile, and that means getting in action again. The point you made about basically taking the tackle is an interesting one because it would horrify the great Alan Jones, who can't stand people off their feet, and the way that Australia wants to play. It's almost a rugby league style, isn't it, Ben?
Yep.
You know, just take the tackle, keep going, and avoid the contest. So that to me can be a valid strategy. But if you look at the rugby championship, Ben, I don't know if that's a solid way to go. It certainly didn't win the game for them at the weekend, did it?
Yeah. I mean, and I really saw that difference between some of the guys in that AB side, and I'll call out Tupelotu and I'll call out Artie Sevilla, who carried the ball hard. And when they took the ball up, they weren't going to go down. And particularly in that second half for the Wallabies versus the Boks, a lot of those forwards trucking the ball up and just hitting the line, and not low body height like the great Dave Brockhoff used to talk about, former Wallabies Bledisloe coach. The only Wallabies Bledisloe coach has ever done a lap around a New Zealand ground carrying the Bledisloe Cup a long time ago. But he loved low body height, but it's not just low body height, they are conceding. They look like they're coming in and they're hitting the deck and setting, and that gave the Boks a great chance to get on the ball and to dominate that ruck, and they did dominate that ruck across the park. Yeah,
so what did you think about the fact that the South African team won, but it was all through the boot of Morné Steyn? I don't think they care so much. Just reading some of the comments out of South Africa, they don't think their team's that good either. But the fact that they managed to beat an Australian side, who they believe is even worse, is a little bit of a boost to their egos.
Well, look,
and so it should be.
Well, a win's a win's a win.
Yeah.
Like this was Australia in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago when they knocked over the Boks and they were feeling good. 18-10 down to the Springboks. And I think they really felt keenly that sense of history as well. They've never won at altitude there at Loftus Versfeld. They had a chance to do it because it was a tight game all the way through. But neither team really grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck. But I think for Checker, and I saw Quade Cooper back up Checker's comments and say that's the best we've played all year, that left a bad taste in my mouth. We're talking about a game where we saw exactly the same issues we've had all year. Line out, we lost 2 or 3 or 4 on our own throw. Scrum was under significant pressure for a lot of that game. We got done in the ruck. We saw a charge down. We saw a yellow card. The ill discipline. We saw Stephen Moore not getting his time with the referee. All the things that we're talking about as issues are still there. If they'd have snuck that game, and as much as I enjoy the fact that Reece Hodge can kick at 60 metres, I was a bit disappointed by seeing him tee it up from 63 out. Yeah. They were looking for a psychological blow, and I don't think this Wallaby side needs to make psychological blows with 63-metre penalties. It needs to make it with a physical game that gets them down the other end.
Yeah, but one of the really important things, and it's been exciting to watch, I just wish everyone went with him, is the form of Will Genia. I just think he's been brilliant.
Yep. Genia, outstanding, and really has. He's been the linchpin in this side, and if anything's working, it is Will Genia. And to not get stuck on the negatives, Dane Hale-Petty had a great game. Yeah. And I saw Cameron Shepherd debut on the other rugby show this week. A great former Wallaby. It was good to see him on TV. Really good fella. And he's been saying this for a couple of weeks. I think I saw it on Rugby 360 too. He's been saying, Hale-Petty, stick him at fullback. He's got a better kicking game than Folau.
And Folau on the wing.
And he wants Folau on the wing. I'd prefer Folau at 13. Yeah. But I think what he's saying is, if you're going to have them both in the team, Hale-Petty's probably going to be a better fullback and get Folau closer to the ball.
Well, go back to a couple of weeks ago when we had the great Brett Papworth in. He suggested kicking to Israel Folau all day. Now, whether that was outside centre or further out to the wing is debatable, but if he's on the wing, that's where you'd be kicking to him. And so I don't think it's such a crazy idea. He could be absolutely devastating. But, Ben, you got to get the ball to him. Yeah. There's no point. Yeah. You know, it's just frustrating that this amazing weapon is just not utilised by Australia.
Yeah. And to echo again those comments about are they being a bit submissive in the tackle, we've said in the previous weeks as well that if there's anything that we thought Checker could do with this side, it was get their mindset right. I looked at Stephen Moore and I looked at Quade Cooper during and after that game and when they were spoken to, and they didn't look happy in the slightest. Now, you lose, you're gonna feel happy, but I mean even in the game, they didn't look like they were enjoying their footy. Now maybe I'm drawing a bit of a long bow here, but I don't think their mindset is right, and I think to stand up afterwards and say we played a great game or our best game, and we're now in a rebuilding phase, you've got to worry when that gets thrown about a bit more. I'm really worried about it.
Well, I think they thought they were making headway. This is what I think they're thinking, Ben. I think they made headway in the game, didn't finish, but they thought everything else was going right. So they've ticked all the boxes, except for the very important one, which was across the stripe and then kicking the conversion. So they obviously, Sio was a great try. I'm actually really happy for Sio. I think I've always been a big fan of him playing more rugby for Australia and Kepu passing it off to him. So that was great, skillful stuff. Yeah. But I think the Australian forwards have to be wary about, what they're actually doing. Are they doing all this, or going forward? So, it's going to be a difficult thing for them to go away from South Africa, go to London, meet Argentina in their final game of the Rugby Championship, and just take the lessons out of that game into a positive performance against Argentina.
Yeah. Well, it's a big game for them. They're playing the Argies in London. It's a replay of the game last year in the World Cup where they did go so well. And look, I hope they felt like they found a bit more in that game against the Boks, and I hope they felt they're going to take that step forward.
Yeah.
I just didn't see it as apparently as I would like to have.
All right. Anything else out of that game?
No, I think, as I said, I saw some good commentary from Hoyles and Horan, who were both saying that they didn't see the Wallabies hunting in that pack.
Yep.
So I thought we saw a good sort of consensus around a lot of this. But I'm still starting to see this rebuilding stuff coming out. And yes, we're blooding a lot of new players, but surely we're not that far away from the World Cup team last year.
Yeah, this is what I love the Australian team, but yes, you're right about the commentary, and it's been noted on the comments. We really appreciate all the praise that we've received from you guys out there, but we believe we're just calling it how we see it, and I think the fair thing is that you do Australia a disservice by just talking up Australia when Australia's not performing well. And there is great credit from that game at the weekend, but we have to be honest here. Australia could do a lot better, and I think there's a couple of things about selection and maybe the calmness that they're lacking out there. And we can't be in a rebuilding program. I mean, we finished second to the All Blacks at the World Cup last year, and somehow have gone backwards dramatically. Why has that happened? That's the question we're asking.
And it feels like a lot of it's upstairs. I mean, there's some chat on our channels around, how dominant this All Blacks team is. Are they going to get beaten? And some of that chat is around, if someone's going to beat the All Blacks, it's not going to be with out finessing them and skill sets that's going to beat them. It's going to be with someone who can control their own ball, who can control their game, and who can dictate play through keeping themselves together. So when you hear talk about the Wallabies feeling anxious, when you see a game against the Boks where they get into the 22 a couple of times and it breaks down, and then when you see them slip to number 4 in the world, which I think is kind of accurate, then there's a long road back. Yeah,
I was going to ask you about that. Slipping down to 4, I think it's probably a fair rap for the Australian side, don't you think?
Well, mate, I think it's about right, and I think the thing we've talked about, is this the most dominant All Blacks team of all time, and when will they be considered one of the great All Blacks team of all time? When you look at the fact that was number 3 and number 4 in the world battling out on the weekend, it doesn't speak volumes about the standard at the top end of the tree at the moment.
Yeah, it doesn't, like 3 and 4, if they're playing like that and South Africa winning like that, it's not that great. But I think hang in there, South African fans. The wheel's turning there. There's a lot of talent, and I think next year a much better side. And I think look out for the next World Cup.
Yeah, and I think the disappointing thing for them is Strauss is a titan for that team. When he is on the park, they are a different side. And that's the kind of attitude and leadership we're not seeing in the Wallabies side. I think Stephen Moore's lost his way a bit this year. But Strauss, when he's on the park, the decisions he makes, the work he does around the park, it's a shame he's pulling the pin for them because they're going to need to replace him and find a whole new way forward.
Yeah, I'd be pleading with him. Strauss, you don't go because he's doing such a great job and just so reliable.
Yeah.
We talked about hookers and just how the best teams in the world have a great hooker who hits their target all the time, but it's also dominant around the ground doing the work. So and they're always exciting to watch. So Australia are losing that Test match, South Africa winning. And the other Test match in Argentina was the mighty All Blacks up against the Los Pumas, and we expected the All Blacks to win, and they did. But there were a few moments in the game where I guess it was one of those games where I think, as you said on Twitter, Benny, that they may have just eased off the gas a bit.
Yeah, look, I think credit to Argentina, if I can use probably what a halftime interview phrase, credit to the other team or full time. But the Argentina did what we've seen them do, and that is compete more strongly for a good 60 minutes in there. They were in the game. They got blown away in a very short space of time from an AB's team that did do well. And less than take the foot off the gas, I think what we saw a good way that you could beat the All Blacks is get them below 15 men. They had 2 blokes off the park in that second half. They were down to 14 men. The Argies used their forward pack to good effect then. Issa, the number 8 for Argentina, almost the player on the park with one very, very clear exception, had a massive game. So really that game, I think, was, as we thought, the Argies would find something a bit more. But, mate, when it was 36-3, I thought, good Lord, they're about to get a complete touch-up. But they kept going. You know, they had that 10-minute period where they did get smashed around and a few great tries from the All Blacks, including that one off the kickoff all the way back up
just
for
before
TJ.
half-time.
That's right.
Yeah.
But really, the Argentinians, I think, got their heads up, got themselves stuck in. And what we saw was, what we aren't seeing from the Wallabies, is more of that contest at the breakdown, more of that belief in themselves. When they sniffed a weakness in the All Blacks defence, players would be coming from everywhere. The support play was really good. They may not be an 80-minute team yet who can compete, but you can see signs that their heads are in a good space.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just not easy. As I say, the All Blacks won't get the credit that they deserve, but because they keep aiming up. So it's like, we've got 6 games to come, so you should be better than the opposition. We'll just tick it off, but they still have to go through the motions. And I think that for me it summed it up. Their strike power, that restart just on half time when they scored off the kickoff was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And Ben Smith involved again there.
Yeah, had a great game. Particularly,
love him.
Came into the centres late in the game and had an excellent game. Now I think we've already seen, and interestingly, we didn't discuss this the last time we saw it, but the New Zealand media can be quite harsh on the All Blacks, and of course the All Black fan base can expect a high bar for the All Blacks, even right now. And I think I've seen a bit of some news around saying some things that didn't work well, some stuff to pick apart. Mackenzie copped a bit of a touch up for some defensive structures at the finish when he made his debut. But really, if I was Steve Hansen, I think that was a fantastic game for his team. He got the chance to try out a few new guys. He got the chance to really throw some new faces out there and get them moving around. He got the chance for his team to feel pressure, right? 20 minutes, 14 men, down the end of the park, scrums 5 metres out, and the defensive line went really well, even a man down. Strangely, the NZ commentators kept saying it was a 7-man scrum, even though the man of the match by an absolute country mile, Anton Leonard-Brown, he was packing in at flanker as well as playing in the centres. Now, Anton Leonard-Brown, what a game. What a game. We've talked about the centres being potentially an area of weakness for them. Fekitoa not quite doing it. Crotty perhaps not playing as well. The player they were looking for clearly, Anton Leonard-Brown.
Yeah. So what did you think of Crotty anyway?
Crotty, I think what we saw was...
I thought he was all right.
I thought he went very well. But what we saw an actual centre combination.
Yeah.
We saw 2 guys playing well together. We saw Leonard-Brown running the right lines, popping great passes, backing up. He was just everywhere. I said including the side of the scrum.
Yeah.
Outstanding game from a young man. Tuipulotu as well. So there's a couple of little diamonds there that they've said these guys are up to it. And when they go full strength back up against the Box or in the next few games, they're going to be better for this game against Argentina.
And Ben, you've been busy on the boards, the old bulletin boards, as we used to say in the early days of the internet. And to the viewer comments of the week. The
strike viewer comment of the week, mate. There's a few comments. There's a few here we want to give a shout out to. And don't forget, tag a friend, post a comment. Zach Goy noting Argentina's improvement, which we've definitely talked about. Rob Martin and John Keenan both put some really involved discussion on there that I enjoyed reading through, with some thoughts on some different parts of the game that we got through. Diggy Doe just wants a Drunken Masters episode of the show. That sounds like when we go on the road and do one in the pub.
I'll try that. I've got half of one there.
Tawarangi brought up Radiki Samo as the last great Wallabies number 8, which was nice.
That's not bad.
A good chat around that, and that halfway try. Adam Thompson, I think
he's
missed him.
48 now.
I think he was 48 when he was playing. Luca Terra raised Argentina crawling. Now, that was a really interesting point he raised on Facebook, that he saw Argentina crawling a lot. And that just made me think, well, maybe that's a nice little tactic. If you've got a team which dominates you at the breakdown, tackles you, throws you down, and then goes to grab the ball, as soon as they let you go, start to crawl. Maybe they can push the refs.
Either crawl or do the old New South Wales country effort up the jumper.
And then we had Murray John Maxwell McGinn on Facebook, who called you Dr. Evil and me Hugh Grant.
As a fan of the Austin Powers series, I think it's great. But look, can we just go with Mr. Worldwide? And I think that'll do me. What do you reckon?
Yeah, mate. And if Julia Roberts wants my numbers, you can have it. And the last 2 comments to mention, Shannon Davis, who got really involved on our Facebook page and posted some really interesting stuff. He called out, as I said at the start of the show, he particularly highlighted Dean Mumm for what he called submissive running. And it was exactly the point I was going to make about the Wallabies pack, but I think I saw it from Rob Simmons, Adam Coleman, Dean Mumm, a couple of the forwards. Scott Sewell, an exception, he carried the ball really well. But that submissive running is definitely what I thought worried me about that Wallabies pack. So congrats to Shannon Davis. And the other one that I couldn't find who it was, so apologies, but someone I had a conversation with, we talked about combos, right?
Yeah.
And the combos of players that we're missing. Australia hasn't had good combos for a while. We saw Anton Linnett-Brown coming with Crotty, and wow, that combo really worked. We haven't had that pairing where, you know, those names that go together, Eels and Giffen, Herbert and Horan, you know.
We've touched on these a few times, haven't we?
And it was a really good piece to say, you know, where are those combos where you get those players who together are more than individually?
Yes, but there's also a passing of the torch. You said Eels and Giffen, but it was Eels and Rod McCaw before that.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So the combinations do one thing. They take the thinking out of the game, because when you have to think, and I know that sounds a bit probably Neanderthal, you've got to be able to just do things instinctively.
But is it also something that we're not seeing come through the Australian system enough? You know, you're seeing All Blacks coming in who are playing a structure and a style of play where they usually fit in quite nicely, and it's taking more time in the Springboks and in the Wallabies, and to a much lesser extent Argentina, for that to stand up and be found.
Yeah, well, I think there's a counter argument to that, because Queensland, the Brumbies and New South Wales were all very different when they played, but within those combinations, even though they were sort of isolated a bit, as long as you've got the combinations playing in that bigger group, I know some of the coaches were actually happy to see a bit of a different flavour at national level of the teams coming in, but as long as you've got those separate cores, you're right to go.
And that's what you need to see from the coach, right? The coach needs to bring those guys together. They need to get that structure before the season proper, international season proper is underway, and get that feeling and get them come together and make them understand how they're going to play together, and then bring them into camp and make it work. Hasn't worked so far this year. And I'd even go so far as to say that, having watched again that the RG's All Blacks game from the weekend, while the All Blacks did play that great 10 or 15 minutes and just kick right away, I think the RG's are probably tactically the smartest team we're seeing of the also-rans in the Rugby Championship right now. We saw them mixing it up. We saw them a couple of rolling mauls, shifting the ball a bit wider. We did see the All Blacks tactically respond to the way they got done previously.
Yeah.
That the line speed from the All Blacks in that first 20 minutes in particular, get up there. And I think they got a little friendly help from the ref there a couple of times, but they got up there and they smashed the RGs and made them aware the way you got us last time isn't going to happen. But I saw the RGs adjust a little bit.
Might have something to do with their sugar-free diet. There was a sort of story the other day about what they're doing in terms of their dietitian and all those sorts of things. And haven't been in the background before. Management just brushed that stuff for starters, but the players, they're really keen, because they're paying attention to what they put into their bodies, and they've still got energy to burn at the end.
It's interesting. I remember actually being in South Africa with you and the Waratahs a few years back, and I walked in to the dining room, whatever it was, one day, and I was talking to big Ewan Link McKenzie, and the players were just starting to graze, right? They're all big units, and the tables were piled up with all this great food. It was massive, and they were all just hoeing in. And I said to Link, mate, why aren't you on the line? He goes, oh, mate, I can't eat like them. I'll get even bigger. I'll just blow up. He said, these guys are racehorses. You've got to feed them up with all this stuff that gets their bodies ready, and then they work that energy out of them. Yeah. But their diet was phenomenal.
They eat all the time. What Ewan didn't say is what he ate later on, just in the little drawer, a mini bar in the hotel. I miss him actually.
We've got to track him down, get him on the show.
I know where he is. So,
he's town planning, I think, isn't he?
He is. But exciting news. Stay here until the end of the show about next week. Yeah. All right, Ben. So combinations. Good comments from our great audience. It's been fantastic, and please share it out as much as you can, because we'll be going all the way through the European tours into the spring tours, and there will be shows over summer, and we'll be back again for Super Rugby next year.
Why would we stop talking rugby, mate?
Oh, there's plenty to talk about.
Actually, one more thing I did want to say about that All Blacks game. I said, Owen Franks, mate, he is an angry man. He's getting a bit involved in a bit of the rough stuff. I think And I think I've worked out what it is. I think he must have got wind that
Low sugar diet.
Scott CO had broken his duck in only many tests back for Owen Franks.
Yeah.
Owen Franks has got that world record for no tries, and I think clearly it's giving him it's getting stuck in the craw. He heard Scott CO's gone over, and mate, he's an angry man at the moment.
Yeah, very
They
angry.
better slow him down.
All right, so there'll be a few angry people if the results don't go their way this time around.
Yep.
For the next and final games in the Rugby Championships for 2016. So, Ben Kimber, the Wallabies are playing at Twickenham. Now, that is an interesting venue. They have played against each other there before. This is totally different, though. And I think this is a massive, massive danger game for the Wallabies. They all are, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
But this is a danger game for the Wallabies.
Argentina are in good shape, right? They dominated 70% of possession last time they played the Wallabies. And it's about that, I think, that hunger and that drive and that hunting like a pack that they're doing that the Wallabies aren't. They're going to struggle if Issa is out, which it looked like he was.
Yeah.
He was a huge part of their engine. But by the same token, the Wallabies back row struggling too. Sean McMahon gave them punch in that first 40 minutes. He's gone. Lapeti Tamani, a different player, big, strong unit, struggles with the hands a little bit. Leroy Houston into the side, though, according to Tono Kefu, Leroy Houston was struggling at NRC level in Australia. So the pace of the game might be beyond him. So really it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it'll be hard to pick. I don't think either team is going to be flying, but I think the Argies might feel like they can get a bit more emotion into the game, thinking about how they got done in the World Cup, thinking about finishing off the Rugby Championship on a strong note. So very much a danger game for the Wallabies.
All right, and what about New Zealand? Can they just finish it off? This is the classic game, the return match against South Africa, and you've got to think, you just can't discount South Africa on home soil.
You can't, though it is, back down at sea level. I think it's Durban, so it's not going to be up at altitude, which is where they like to play it particularly when they want to get back to that old style of the kicking game. I think Mornay Steyn, I saw some of the South African press really waxing lyrical about his game. I wasn't that impressed, right? He played a good, solid number 10
Oh, there was a
for
lot
South Africa.
that
He played well, but
they weren't too happy. Big Cobus Visa wasn't that happy at all.
Okay. So look,
I respect his opinion.
But I think they'll need Strauss to be out there for 80 minutes if there to be any shot. But I just think with what we saw from the All Blacks and the lessons that Hansen were able to get in their head after the pressure Argentina put them under. I think Kano comes back in probably. They'll probably put Tupeluto back to the bench and start with Whitelock again. I think they're going to be in good shape, and they're going to be, I think, pushing South Africa very, very hard.
All right, so how many wins would that make it in a row?
All of them.
So, if they keep going, I think they'll get basically through to the early 20s.
Yeah, they can do it this year.
Yeah. So, so tips then, points-wise, Ben?
I think New Zealand will probably do it by about 20 again. I think I think South Africa showed they can stick with them as they did for 60 minutes, but they're going to have to be super disciplined, and I think that New Zealand will find a bit more, so I think it'll be about 20. And mate, I'm going to flip a coin at Twickenham. I really am, and I'm going to land on, I think maybe the Wallabies will do it, just because I think Issa is more important to their game than maybe Sean McMahon was for the Wallabies. But I'm up in the air on that one for sure.
Big blow. I'll give it to the Wallabies by 1 point.
Yep.
They'll win by 1.
Yep.
And I think 12 points will be the difference, South Africa and New Zealand. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's tighter, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's bigger. It's just so hard. They're just so hard to judge. But as I say every single time, and I've been there on the sideline when South Africa's played so many times, you just can't discount them on home soil. They play so much better there, and I think New Zealand will have to be on their guard.
Yeah.
And they've got a pretty tough travel regime as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting close to it. And then there's one more game across for the Bledisloe, which is already decided after that.
It is, and that's a big, big task. And this Argentina game is really important for the Wallabies. They'll want to at least come in winning ways into their final Bledisloe game. I mean, if a rampant New Zealand off a complete clean sweep of the Rugby Championship is waiting for them, at the end of the road, that could be a very tough game.
Yeah, and they'd love to be holding that trophy aloft just to rub it in officially at the end of the third Bledisloe. There's no doubt about that. And then the spring tours begin as well. So yeah, it's interesting close to the competition. Keep the comments coming. Now here's our exclusive news for the show next week. Right in here between us, I don't know how we're going to fit him in, but he will fit. He's actually pretty slim nowadays. Is the great, some say the greatest fly half that's ever played the game, Mark Ella, will be in the studio. So if you've got any questions for Mark, he's never backward in going forward. He will say what he thinks. He's already said to me, "What do you want me to say?" I said, "Just say it all.
Tell it like it is."
Tell it like it is. So Mark Ella, special guest in the studio next week. We're recording on Monday afternoon, so please tune in. And that show, if we get a chance, we'll probably bump out later that night on the Monday. So there'll be lots to talk about. It might go a little bit longer because we've got Mark here. So we're really looking forward to that. All right, mate. Good to see you again.
Well, I don't have to dress up for next week.
Yeah.
Tag a friend, post a comment, and please share the show out. We love the support, and keep it coming.
So, you're I'm Mr. Worldwide.
I'm Hugh Grant. I don't know.
You're Hugh Grant.
I don't know what. Hugh Grant.
No. I'm Dr. Evil, apparently.
I'm more in front of Dr. Evil, man.
Yeah, Dr. Evil. Yeah, I'll go with Mr. Worldwide if that's all right. Yeah. Pitbull, and whoever this is. I don't know. All right, thanks for joining us for episode 222.
The Richie Benno episode, 222.
Cricket's never been the same. We're losing too many of those great commentators. Enjoy your rugby this weekend, and we'll be back next week to go through it all with our special guest right here, Mark Ella. Until next week, enjoy your rugby.